Welcome to Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. This podcast is about the journey to a more sustainable future in order for us to be able to do our bit to achieve net zero. I'll be discussing a variety of topics with experts in their field in order to educate and increase our knowledge of clean energy, electric vehicles and the electric vehicle infrastructure. So whether you're an individual wanting to make a difference at home, a small business or a corporate, this podcast is just for you. Okay, so on Electric Evolution today, I actually have Professor Richard Allan, who is a Professor of Climate Science at the University of Reading and just happens to be my husband. So welcome. I'm going to call you Richard on here. Welcome and thank you for coming on.
Nice to see you.
It's slightly weird because we are still doing this in the same house, aren't we? So yeah. But it made sense to actually bring you on this because when I'm talking about where I want to be with this podcast, it's partly to do with us as a family as well. So that's where I see us going. But let's start off by if you can give everybody a bit of your background and how you got into what you're doing now at the university.
Okay, well, when I was young, I remember the winter of 81, 82. It was pretty snowy back where I was growing up in St Albans, and I got interested in the weather. How can we forecast when snow's going to happen or not, and why do they sometimes get it wrong? And so I got interested in the weather, and then I learnt about how 20,000 years ago we were in the midst of an ice age, and there were ice sheets moving across northern Britain, and so I became interested in how that happened. And so I studied my maths and physics and went on to go to university and then did a PhD at the University of Reading. And now I'm a climate scientist at the University of Reading, having previously worked at the Met Office for a bit as well. And I also have worked on the Intergovernmental Panel on climate change.
So do you want to just expand a little bit on that? So it was a new chapter that they'd introduced, wasn't it, for the IPCC? Just explain a bit about that chapter.
Yeah, so the IPCC was set up to, assess the current understanding of climate change, and that's been, periodically there've been assessment reports since the 1990. So the latest one I was involved in, and the ones before that. So this time there was a new chapter on the water cycle, so I was a lead author in that. But I was also involved in the summary for policymakers, which I think is an extremely important document that kind of fed into the COP26 in Glasgow. And as you well remember, it kind of disturbed our summer in 2021 when I had to go into these approval process where you actually have to get 150 government representatives to agree line by line every sentence of the report. And it's important because therefore each country has a buy-in to what the report says. It's kind of agreed to it, and therefore it's a motivation that they need to act on it because it's been agreed jointly.
Very true. Yes, and yes, I do remember that very much so. It was quite a stressful time, wasn't it then?
Yeah.
Especially eating into the summer holidays. So can you just give everybody a little bit of background? I'd like you to kind of provide a bit of science background, if you can, to climate change. What's happened in order for us to reach this point, and what have we done to contribute to it?
Yeah, so we know that climate has always changed, going back millions of years or tens of thousands of years, and you can look at the data going back and you see climate has changed naturally. But what's happening now is completely extraordinary. It's well outside of what we can see. So, for example, you can go back and look at ice cores in Antarctica that go down nearly 2 kilometres, and the further back you go, the further down you go, it's like a time machine. The further back in time you go. And that can tell you about all these wild swings that I mentioned before about ice ages and interglacial periods that we're in now. But what it also does is it traps fossilised kind of bubbles of air in the ice core. So you can actually track the atmospheric composition over time. And that actually shows that carbon dioxide has been varying quite a lot over many tens of thousands of years, between about 100 and 80 and 280 parts per million in the atmosphere. So very small amounts, but significant, because carbon dioxide is such a strong greenhouse gas. And so we know that carbon dioxide helps to amplify these glacial cycles in the past. But the crucial thing is the current concentrations, rather than being between 180 and 280 parts per million, are now at 420 parts per million. So well outside what's happened before. And we know for a fact that current concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere are the highest in at least the last 2 million years, at least, probably a lot longer. And that's important because carbon dioxide is a very potent greenhouse gas. We've already got a natural greenhouse effect on Earth, and that keeps the planet habitable. But if you add more greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, it enhances, it strengthens this greenhouse effect. It limits how efficiently the atmosphere can cool to space. So what we're in the moment is that carbon dioxide is going up. That's meaning there's more energy coming in than leaving, and that's causing the climate to warm up. And we know for a fact that carbon dioxide is rising because of humans, and it's primarily because of burning of fossil fuels, so coal predominantly, but also oil and natural gas as well. But also making cement is a big effect, and to a lesser extent, but still important, deforestation. So we know that every year human activities is putting more carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And some people might argue, well, these amounts that are going into the atmosphere are tiny compared to what naturally comes out and back into the ocean every year. That's true. But these natural flows of carbon dioxide and carbon are in balance, whereas we're tipping things out of balance. And that increase in carbon dioxide is heating the planet. And then you get some knock-on effects that actually amplify that climate change. So the bottom line is that we know that human activities have increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's heating the planet. And we know that pretty much all of the warming that we've seen since pre-industrial times, which is about just over 1 degree Celsius, is exclusively due to human activities. So we've already caused a warming of 1 degree C.
So what is going to happen in future to the climate if we don't do something to prevent this from keeping on, from happening moving forwards?
Yeah, so I mean, we're all aware of the extreme events that are going on across the world. So we've seen in the last couple of years, for example, severe flooding in Belgium, Netherlands and Germany last year. We've had a severe heat wave in Western Europe this year, as we remember, and also drought conditions. But we've also seen severe flooding in other places. And these events, you can't pin each event and say, well, this event was caused by climate change due to humans. But what you can say is that the warming, because of human activities, has made these events more severe. And so the reason for that is, for example, take the flooding that we've seen in this country, but also in Europe and China and elsewhere. In a warmer world, the air holds more water vapour, invisible gaseous water vapour. And when that gets drawn into storms, that then gets sucked in and then spewed out as rainfall or snowfall. And the intensity of the rainfall is stronger in a warmer world. And similarly, a warmer atmosphere is more thirsty for this water. So in some regions, it's sucking moisture out of the ground more effectively and moving that with the winds into these storm systems. But, where it's sucking it out of the ground, you can get the onset of drought more rapidly. The warmer temperatures, of course, will exacerbate heat waves and wildfires. So we're already seeing some of these effects happening. And if we carry on warming as we're doing, these events are only going to become more severe. So it's like we've only seen the tip of the iceberg so far. So things are going to get worse. We're going to get more intense rainfall and flooding events. We're going to get more severe droughts, like the one, for example, we're seeing in Somalia. We're going to get more serious heat waves like we saw in Western Europe with unprecedented record-breaking temperatures. So every bit of warming is important. As we warm the planet more, we'll increase the severity of these extremes, and they'll particularly hit the most vulnerable across the globe.
So what can we do to prevent this ourselves then?
So, as I said, the primary cause of this is we're emitting carbon dioxide and, to a lesser extent, but still important, methane and nitrous oxides into the atmosphere, and that's making the greenhouse effects more potent. So, the simple solution, simple to say but not to do, is to cut greenhouse gas emissions. So, not just slow the rate at which we're emitting, but actually cut to net zero. So we've got to, actually get to the stage where any residual emissions of carbon dioxide or methane are balanced by a flux of carbon dioxide into the ground or into the ocean using any technological solutions or nature-based solutions we can. So that's where we've got to get to. At the moment, we're still actually increasing emissions, let alone decreasing emissions, and let alone getting anywhere near to net zero. So that, that is what we've got to do to limit climate change. We can't go back to where we were in pre-industrial times, but we can limit the warming to, say, going back to the Paris Climate Agreement a few years ago, limiting the warming well below 2 degrees above pre-industrial, and if possible 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial. And those levels were chosen because above those levels you start to get really unmanageable consequences across the globe.
So you've just mentioned net zero then. So, and we hear net zero a lot, don't we? So in order for us to reach, so actually, do you know what? Can you just give an explanation of what we see net zero being, as as say, like as a small business for me, and individuals that will be watching and listening to this, what is net zero?
Well, I mean, theoretically it would be where all human activities that put extra carbon dioxide into the atmosphere would cease. There'd be none of that. Practically, that's not going to be possible even in the long term, because there are certain activities that will generate some emissions. I mean, unless we cut all flights or somehow generate flights that are able to run on batteries or and solar, there'll always be some emissions. So practically, there'll have to be some technological or nature-based solution whereby any emissions of carbon into the atmosphere through, say, burning oil that makes carbon dioxide go into the atmosphere, any of that is balanced by an equal and opposite flow of carbon into either the land or into the ocean through some solution where, for example, reforesting or afforesting regions permanently is using native trees that will survive.
Yes.
But other ways are, for example, we hear about where you can grow a crop that takes in carbon dioxide from the atmosphere as it grows. The carbon goes into its trunks. You burn that crop for energy, but then you capture the gas that comes out, the carbon dioxide that comes out, and bury it deep underground. That's one theoretical solution. So you have a virtuous cycle where you're continually growing crops, generating energy, but capturing the carbon and storing it underground. So you're actually drawing in carbon into the ground in that process. But none of these technological solutions have been proven yet. We're at the early stages in kind of developing some of these possibilities.
So that's kind of like a positive trade-off then, isn't it, that we're talking about? We're sort of, as in a trade-off, we're doing one thing and therefore we need to do something else to compensate for those things that are actually happening. Is that what you're saying?
Kind of. I mean, essentially the bottom line is we've got to massively reduce our emissions. That's the number one aim. So any activity that produces carbon dioxide, be it driving a car, be it heating your home with natural gas, be it going on a flight, these emissions have got to be reduced to as low as we can, as close to zero as we can. So, for example, moving towards electrification of the energy system, moving away from natural gas as a heating method, and reducing flights to reducing emissions from flights, for example, through industry, and reducing methane emissions from agriculture. And then anything that's left over that we can't reduce any further, then we'd have to balance by some technological fix to actually draw carbon in to the ground through these, technological solutions. So we're getting to a balance. So any emissions are balanced by a net uptake of carbon through technological means, and that will be
I mean,
a realistic net zero.
Yeah, I was going to say that there's so much innovation out there at the moment. I was at an EV show the other day at the Excel, and just seeing that on the electric vehicle infrastructure, the actual innovation that's out there that is coming through is just amazing. My mind was blown as I went round this exhibition. So I can imagine there's things that are being invented now that we don't even know about that will help with all this, won't there?
Yeah, for sure.
So there's if we look at climate change, kind of over the past few years, obviously we've been together for a number of years. You've come across plenty of skeptics out there. So what's happened to change their minds? Is it just because of the fact that you can't argue with the evidence of what's happening, or are there other things that are actually changing people's minds?
Well, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, there was always a lot of evidence, even back in the 90s when there were a lot of skeptics that were very vocal in the early 2000s. But you're right, their position is untenable based on the scientific evidence. But nevertheless, you've got to see why, what the motivation is for some of these skeptics. And many of them may have interests in fossil fuel industries or something or some funding. So there can be that aspect that there's a kind of an additional motivation for them to hold a particular view. Otherwise, once you've got a view, it's very difficult to change it. Even as a scientist, you do a selective filtering of information that comes in, and you like the stuff that agrees with what you think, and you're not so keen on the stuff that doesn't. But the science is so clear now, based on multiple lines of evidence across many years, that I very rarely come into contact with climate skeptics now, because their position is untenable.
There is one person that I can remember that you spoke in front of, or you spoke aside. I'm not going to mention that person's name,
Okay.
But that was a very interesting time, wasn't it, when you actually went up against a real massive climate skeptic?
Well, I found it incredibly stressful, because I was at quite an early stage in my career, and they were almost questioning my integrity, my scientific expertise. So, and because they would just bombard you with these 20-page dense documents saying why they were right, and you can't literally respond to some of these things rapidly, because even though the evidence is clear, it's difficult to pick arguments with people who are very skilled at manipulating and cherry picking. So
Absolutely.
I'm glad there's not so much of that to deal with these days.
I'm glad you've not gone up against him again. I mean, it'd be interesting to see whether that person's actually changed his mind, just out of curiosity. Hopefully so, because the evidence, like you say now, is indisputable. So
I've not heard a peep from him in years.
Thank God for that. So I was gonna actually also talk about, so part of the reason, as I've explained this on the very first podcast, is about our the reason behind the podcast in the first place, which isn't just piggybacking what you do, kind of at the university. It's my own journey as an individual, as well as us as a family, and and I'd like to actually give back as well, and I think trying to educate people about climate change, because there's such a lot of information out there and so much noise, and people don't always hear the positive side of things, and they'll get a little glimpse of something that's going on, and they just kind of think that there's just negative things. So that's part of the reason why I wanted to kind of release this podcast, because as a family we're going on a journey, aren't we, really? That if I call it the journey to electrification, that's kind of what our long-term journey is, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's everyone's journey as well, isn't it? I mean, you mentioned, I mean, for example, the University of Reading, as a large company in Reading, is trying to move to net zero by 2030, and they're hugely electrifying, using solar panels, their infrastructure, and now we're looking into moving away from obviously burning natural gas for heating and going towards heat pumps. So there's those kind of aspects, but of course there are other personal things that people can do. Flying less or not at all is probably the top one in a rich society, because that produces so many CO2s per person. Cutting out driving, going towards walking, cycling, those kind of aspects, changing the diet to a low carbon diet. So, for example, predominantly plant based. And it's not almost a matter of, saying eating meat, going plant based on one day. It's more like eating meat on one day. If a famous person once said, if we all do a little bit, we'll achieve a little bit. Everyone's got to do a massive amount. So the only real way that individuals can contribute a massive amount is through coordinated, collaborative, cross-sector approaches. So that's where, on the one hand, you've got governments who are setting laws and building a framework to help people like us to move towards low carbon. But also you've got the fact that Reading Borough Council, for example, is doing a lot towards getting to net zero. So local councils, cities, large companies, local groups. It's a real cross-group and cross-sector, so transport, agriculture, heating, across all these aspects. And it's got to be a cross-sector kind of approach whereby small groups can contribute, but you do need this top-down contribution as well as a bottom-up contribution, because like you mentioned earlier on, we've got this common aim of getting to net zero. We don't want to increase the severity of flooding, droughts, heat waves, and also there's the long-term issues of sea level rise, because sea level will continue rising for hundreds, even thousands of years, because it takes that kind of timescale for the deep oceans to heat up and expand, but also for giant ice sheets like Greenland to melt. So if you went back to the last time that the world was at a comparable level of temperature as it was in the last decade, that's 125,000 years ago, the last interglacial period, when sea levels were maybe 5 to 10 meters higher than they are today. So these kind of things to think about really put it home as to what an important point in human history we're at. And so we've got to all act cross-sector. And you're right that individually we can also do our bit with the help of governments and local borough councils. So with our house, for example, we've still got an inefficient house. We need to insulate it better. If it's well insulated, then perhaps we can move to heat pumps rather than natural gas, solar panels for electricity, and of course helping to charge our future electric car, which we all need to get at some point soon. So yeah, sorry, that was a bit of a long answer to your question.
No, it's absolutely fine. It's not long. I was going to say, our son James is as we both know, is 17. So really, what we do now will affect him when we're gone, won't it? So we have to think about this in kind of. I'm not trying to be morbid or anything like that, but we have to think about the people, the kids now, and the teenagers, and people. What we do now will affect them in the long term, won't it? So it's about leaving them, not leaving a negative legacy. It's about leaving a positive legacy for them, isn't it? Really,
and that's a really good point, because that's the other thing, to act thoughtfully. So rather than just acting with the sole purpose of we've got to get to net zero, you can get to net zero through methods that can help in other ways, help quality of life, the way we live our lives, through nature-based solutions, helping to deal with the biodiversity crisis, So having methods to get to net zero that are also helping to improve the lives of humans, but also the lives of ecosystems, animals, plants.
Yeah, it's a long-term thing, isn't it? It's not it's as I say with continuous improvement, it is not an overnight thing. You know, this is long term, but we all need to be in it for the ride. And this is kind of this podcast really is to kind of get that word out there and try and reach people just like me. I'm saying we're not all professors, obviously I'm not, but just kind of anybody. I want this to get out to as many people as I possibly can, because I just think education is really, really important, and that's how I see this podcast being. It's an education for other people. It's an education for me, for us as a family, because the journey that we're on to actually make our family life more sustainable and kind of work, be using more renewable sources and kind of be more sensible about how we're dealing with things moving forward. I just see that as really, really important.
Well, yeah, and I'll try and tune in as well, because I can learn a hell of a lot.
Oh, I've been talking to some brilliant people already. So yeah, it's going to be a real journey for us all. So I'm going to finish there by just asking, if people want to get hold of you, how do they find you? You've got a university website, haven't you? So you're on the University of Reading website.
So you could Google Richard Allan climate. That usually gets to me.
And Allan with an A-N.
Definitely.
Everybody thinks for an E-N.
Yeah.
But A-double-L-A-N.
I'll not respond to any messages to Professor Allan.
But you're also on Twitter as well, aren't you? So
Yeah.
I can't remember what your Twitter handle is.
RP Allan UK, I think.
Yeah, I think that's it, isn't it? Or just find him on the Reading University website, so you'll be on there. But listen, thank you very much for joining me. It's been really. I shall be getting you back on here again. But thank you very much, and to everybody else, thank you for listening and watching, and I shall see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
You've been watching Electric Evolution with Liz Allan. Don't forget to subscribe and click on the bell icon, and you'll receive all of our weekly videos. Thanks for watching. See you soon.